With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoweh's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful ends for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more. Welcome, friends and allies of the Exploring More podcast. I'm Michael Thompson. I'm with S.J. Jennings and Tom Benner, my good friends on the journey that we're on in the kingdom. And we had a series about the good heart, and Tom was in here with us talking about God's heart and what God's heart's like. And I think it came up even during the podcast. There's just so much to explore there that we are going to hit it again. We're going to revisit this, and I think we got probably a two-parter, 2 sessions on the heart of God, and that we want to just continue to explore and continue to offer and share some of our discoveries and be able to. It feels like I'm trying to get my arms around a mountain. I can just kind of hug where I'm at. I can kind of grab the dirt and the stuff that's right there, but it's so big what we're talking about, and that's good. Shouldn't God's love be that big? Shouldn't God's heart be that big? And before we venture in too much, there was this conversation that we started last time about what's in the way. Remember, we talked about the physical and the spiritual relationship between the heart and clogged arteries and the flow and things like that. But thinking some more about that, I think it would be good for our listeners, for us to share what we've discovered about what has been in the way of a heart connecting with the love of God. If there's something on my end that's blocking receiving God's love, that's a problem. And what if, and we've found it can happen, and secondly, we've found that you can be healed. God can heal you of those things that have happened that are causing barriers or distance or, for me, I think one of the things that was really important for me to overcome was my perception of God. I mean, I had a pretty dark and pretty sinner-centered perception of myself, but that was in relationship too with God and how I viewed Him. So let me be clear. In the relationship with God, for a lot of years, I believed pretty critically, I'm the problem. I'm the problem. But what I believed about God and His heart wasn't helpful. It actually reinforced the problem. So there was 4 really core beliefs that I believed about God. One was He's distant. He's far away. Secondly, I believed that when He was near, He's upset. He's angry. Third,
because of what you have or haven't done?
Yeah, haven't done enough, and what I have done's not good.
Right.
I'm the problem. So He's distant, or I believed he's mad or upset. Another thing that I believed was that He was just silent. Kind of had His arms folded and wasn't speaking, and that He was just. It wasn't shut down. It's just he doesn't speak. And then the fourth thing was that, like I said, I'm the problem. So I felt and believed in my heart that I'm not good enough. I'm just not good enough. Not good enough for His love, not good enough for His attention, not good enough for Him to speak. I mean, those things kind of just moved in the garden of my heart in a very sinister way and created some barriers between me and God. So does that make sense? My perception of Him and my perception of myself were things that were in the way. And not all of those things, but yeah, maybe so. Maybe all of those things were things I had experienced with other people in very, very formative years. Teachers, coaches, parents, there were things that came into my story that taught me that. I mean, you just don't dream that stuff up. I did a lot of church time. I really did growing up. And the pastor was pretty angry at different parts of the service and sermon. He would yell and he would deliver messages that were reinforced pretty regularly. And this was not just one church. I mean, we moved around the country when I was little. And so I dropped into a few different church families. But it seemed like in every church family, my takeaway was God's mad or he's distant. I'm not good enough. And he only speaks in his Bible, and that's it. So recovering the heart of God for me has been awesome. It has been huge over the last almost, 18, 19, getting up on 20 years, 2 decades. But goodness, the renovation that's had to happen there, the surgeries that have had to happen, the healings, the confessions on my part. I believe those 4 things about God. I did. And they were very much operating and in the way of intimacy and connectedness with God. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
So I want to talk about that. What has been your experience with the heart of God, and what's in the way of receiving His love? Remember in the earlier podcast series, it was, "As I have loved you, so love one another."
Yeah.
And then in 1 John 4, 7 and 8, that God loves first and God loves most, and it's from that filling and fueling of God's love that we can then love one another. Well, I know where the mechanism was leaking, and it was upstream there, where experiencing God's love was absolutely clogged. It was blocked. It was arrested in some very significant ways that needed treatment, that needed some time and some experiences with God. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. What's in the way, and then how did we experience God delivering us from some of those ways?
What I remember, part of my story growing up was that my dad started out, he was an educator. He started out as a school teacher, and he got promoted fairly regularly because he was ambitious in that regard.
Hard worker.
But, yeah. So one of my biggest dreads in life was when the teacher would say, because he'd be the principal or then the superintendent, they'd say, well, Tommy, do you want to go see your father? You want me to take you down to see your father? And so think about and plus that didn't connotate any like, oh, I'm going to get some grace here. This was like embarrassing to him, embarrassing to me.
I mean,
you're walking the green mile.
Yeah, that's right. How many kids in your school is the principal or vice principal or another teacher your dad? And the teacher can use that on you, man. Come on, that's not fair.
It was brutal. And so, but what it did for me with when the time came for me to enter into a relationship with my Heavenly Father through Christ and that whole experience, I had just so programmed that going to see the Father is not a good thing. And so I had to overcome a lot of subconscious programming and believing in vows and such that I would have made along the way to help open that up. And so for me, we talk about in the conferences a lot that what God really, the good that He's up to so often in our lives initially is healing. It's really about restoring some real deep broken rifts in us that are blocked. Through real serious exploration, some of those deep cracks in my foundation got mended. But for me, what really was required for me to believe that God loved me was I got into this routine of, I got introduced to soaking prayer, which is really a type of prayer where the whole point is to let God love you. Mm-hmm. It's not the part of your prayer life where you're making intercession or requests for others. It's really about, Dad, I need time with you, and I need to grow in my trust and experience your love. So it would be like this daily time I would set aside in the morning of just getting in a lounger and just laying down, listening to worship music and letting God pour over me with His love. And that literally was about a 3-year journey of like very intense, regular therapy, you might say. But it did it really accomplished that. Then it becomes, what we're talking about becomes more about training, about learning, about discovering what it means to hear guidance and wisdom and walk with Him and ask questions, which is more stories. But that began for me, that undid something that was set in me that it took a while to get it out and to get it healed and restored. But because of that, now I don't fear, and I don't have any doubt that I can come to God and I can talk to him, I can ask questions,
Yeah.
and that he'll speak to me and help me.
Yeah, man, gosh, that's good. SJ, before you swing, I just want to reiterate one of the things we've discovered as we've explored the kingdom and the kingdom way and what God's like and how it works is what you believe matters.
Exactly.
If you believe lies about God or about yourself or about others, it's part of this blockage stuff. If Romans 10:9 and 10 is true, if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord, you will be saved. I mean, come on. If belief saves you, belief in false things can crush you.
Yeah, that's true. So
And
true.
so for our listeners, that's what I'm confessing, that I believed things that were false about
Right.
the Father.
So what did you do? How did you?
Yeah.
What was your journey with
Just
that?
like you. I mean, it wasn't the soaking prayer that came later, but I realized I was challenged in some things that I was reading and as I was exploring, and, we were a part of a lot of that together. But it was kind of this aha moment, like, oh my gosh, I've believed that God's distant.
Yeah.
It's not true. And so I would say there was a confession that I said, God, I'm so sorry. I've believed that. In my story, along my journey, I felt that. I don't know who was at work in that. I have an idea. The kingdom of darkness is doing everything they can to separate us from the love of God. And then when we, receive Christ, they're working double time to keep him distant, to keep us distant from him. So there's forces at work beyond us,
Right.
and that are preying, P-R-E-Y, preying on our young hearts, preying on. I mean, we've confessed this. There's no way we've interpreted all the stories of our lives accurately. So it's not if you have some false things running around in your heart.
Right.
You do. And the question is, what do you want to do about them? And if you can enter into this conversation with God, where am I believing lies about you, about myself, about others? That is a absolute freedom march. It's just an incredible way to explore these things that could be in the way of being loved by God and loving others. So for me, Tom, I couldn't tell you when the day was that they came in, but I've got them in my journals, the days that I saw them with this thing we call the eyes of the heart. I saw them and said, this can't be good. If God's mad, I'm not good enough, he's distant, or he's just silent. I mean, those were all things that needed me to take like a legal document. It's like they literally are like a legal document in the kingdom. When you signed up or subscribed, put your initials by, when you buy a house, all those documents, you buy a car, all those documents. Well, look at all the documents along the journey of your life and your life story. You signed for things. Is that your initials? Yeah. Now it has power and authority in your life. You signed it and it has. So how do you unsubscribe? I don't want that deal anymore. I don't believe that anymore. So those were huge steps in getting free from father wounds, coach wounds, mother wounds, teacher wounds, sibling wounds, and even my own wounding of others. I mean, there's a lot of wounding going on in this story that we've all encountered and endured, and it can have an effect on your heart.
Oh, it does. It not only has an effect on your heart, it has an effect on those around you within your sphere of influence, simply because you bring your life to the people around you. You bring the weight of your life, whether it's a life of freedom or a life of bondage. You bring that life to the people around you.
Yeah.
So I think for me, Michael, I came to know Jesus late in life. We didn't go to church when I was a kid. I didn't grow up with any real knowledge of God. I mean, I think if you asked me when I was 12 or whatever arbitrary age, hey, is there a God? Yeah. That would have been the end of an extent of my knowledge of what that means. So, when I came to know Jesus when I was 35 years old, I was at a really, really dark place and had literally nowhere else to turn other than death.
Wow.
So you would think, well, okay, you don't have really much baggage when it comes to God. There's what could be in the way, right? Well, lots could be in the way. Most of it to do with things I had done, things that I had done to other people, to myself, agreements I had made, like you said, vows, lies I had signed for. And those things matter in the kingdom, whether you believe the kingdom exists or not, right?
Right.
So I'll just briefly share a story of some things that were in the way, and I wasn't really even aware of them. I first came to the Heart of a Warrior weekend. It was called Top Gun back then in 2008, 10 years ago. Wow. And didn't even really know what I was hearing, just wanted more of it. So I kept coming back. So in year 5, Tom sets up a session where we do some soaking prayer. And I don't know if you had done it before that or not. I don't think so. I think that might have been the first year you did that. Soaking prayer, we have an opportunity for, 30 or 40 minutes, put on some of the music that you referred to, and we just kind of bask in God's presence and let him take us wherever he's going to take us.
Yeah,
So,
a couple hundred guys.
in this big room. That's right.
It's wild. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's guys sitting in their chairs, and there's guys sprawled out on the floor, and
right.
some guys are 10 or 15 minutes in, start snoring. So God's taking them to a place of rest, right?
Yeah.
But that first experience for me, I remember sitting at the chair at the top of the stairs, and I started hearing this name. Abigail. Now, I've got a niece named Abigail, but I felt like it wasn't in reference to her. I didn't really know what it was about. So it just keeps coming to me. That's all I'm hearing in my head. And so I turn around and I see at the end of the session, I see one of our good friends, Blake. And Blake and I had connected earlier in the weekend. And so I said, man, Blake, can we just go talk somewhere? So we sit down and we start talking. And what God brought up in me is, part of my story has to do with adultery, has to do with seeking affirmation and medication from substances and from women. And so I got involved in a long-term affair back in 2003-4 before I knew who Jesus was. And that's part of what brought me to that deep, deep hole. But I got that woman pregnant in 2004. And what God wanted me to talk to Blake about was the abortion I paid for. And so I talked to Blake about that, and I confessed to him I was having a really hard time believing that forgiveness was available for someone that would kill his own child.
Wow.
So I sobbed for a good hour with Blake, and Blake was so kind and so tender with my heart, and led me to a place where I started to believe that was possible, and then led me to a place where I came to understand that the name I was hearing was the name of my daughter, Abigail, who's with Jesus now. I walk out of that building, and I remember walking up the hill towards the mess hall, and there's a beautiful vista going up that walkway, and big field out in front, and the mountains off in the background. And it was later in the day, so the sun was low in the sky. It was just gorgeous. And the vision that God gave me in his tender, tender way, the vision he gave me as I walked up that hill, I'm looking at this beautiful picture of the world and picture of life. And what appeared to me was a prison cell door, as though I was inside the prison. And then it swung open. So what the Holy Spirit, what God revealed to me in that moment was that I had been living in a prison cell. I had painted the inside of the cell to look like freedom, to look like this beautiful vista, right?
Well, you're a decorator then.
Yeah, absolutely. We decorate our prison cells. And so then the door swung open, and I experienced freedom in that moment and forgiveness.
That's so awesome.
And still journeying in that. And so I guess I share that story to share that in order to find out what's in the way, we have to continue on this journey with him. There's so much, I didn't even know that was there.
Right. Yeah.
I knew that I was feeling guilt and shame and unforgiveness towards myself. I didn't really talk about it with anybody, but I didn't know how in the way it was until it wasn't.
Well, you brought this up, Tom. First of all, that's an incredible story. And I think we have encountered and experienced God in some ways. When you think about, you were saying, you've said this before, but you were saying offline about how the power of shame and guilt.
Oh, yeah.
And it doesn't mean it's riddled all over your life, but if there's a part of your life that shame, the spirit of shame, spirit of guilt are working, then that's a part of your heart that's cornered off.
Yeah.
You're not wholehearted. You're not free or as free as you could be. And I love the story too, because it's another example, SJ, of who's more committed to our freedom, us or the Father. And it's the Father. And so one of the things we've been practicing for the last dozen years has been asking God questions. Where am I hurt? Where am I hurting? Is there any part of me? This is David's, is there any hurtful way in me? Lead me in the way everlasting, which asking God questions. So I go back to my little list, which was a big list. If God's distant or he's mad or he's silent, that's not going to work. If a belief I have is he's not going to talk to me, and yet I need his instruction on where I'm hurting, where the blockage is, right? I mean, you wouldn't want a doctor, your cardiologist, just giving you notes or writing how to do a healthy heart when you need to interact with that physician. You want to know. So this is, elevate that to this conversation of, how do we see shame and guilt overcome? How do we get relief from something like an abortion in our past, or a couple other stories that we may have to share, just to encourage our listeners that the love of God is real, and it will transform you as you experience it. So let's take a break. We'll come back and pick up from there. Hi, Exploring More podcast listeners. Did you know the second largest spoken language in the world is Spanish, with over 400 million people using Spanish as their native language? Well, over the past year, we have gotten several requests for the Heart of Aware Spanish translation. So we're excited to announce the release of the Heart of Aware book, along with the 14-day devotional on the YouVersion reading plans, now available in Spanish. You can go to our website, www.zoweh.org/Spanish, for all the details and how to get your Spanish copy today. All right, welcome back. SJ just shared a story, and a significant story of his life of restoration, really. A part of your life that, you're not, can't be one of your favorite stories to tell.
It's hard. Yeah,
and yet,
it's hard.
And yet it's one of the stories that's appropriate for how does God see you? How does he love you? How does he come for you?
Yeah, let me just share. I shared that her name is Abigail, and in the Hebrew that means father's joy.
Wow.
Yeah, just had to share that.
Yeah, that's real good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so our hearts can go to a lot of other places. There's a lot of affairs of the heart, really. It was Brent Curtis, Gary Barkalow's friend and a mentor for him, that wrote The Sacred Romance, that kind of put this phrase out there: less wild lovers,
Right.
that we give our hearts to. I mean, honestly, we want we're made for it. We want to be loved because we're made for love. And so we get out there and we try to find it. We try to make it happen. We try to even coerce it. We try to control it. We do things and say things to fit in or to not get hurt. And so, how does the heart of God deliver us from that way and invite us to trust him? I had a story that was in college, not quite as dramatic as yours, SJ, but dramatic for me.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Because one of the affairs that I realized I had was with a game. And it was the object of my thoughts. It controlled my life. I was a high school basketball player, went on and played in college, and it wasn't going well. My junior year, it just wasn't going well. I wanted to be at a different place. I wasn't playing enough. I mean, it sounds kind of petty, but I remember I was so upset and so striving and so trying to make this happen. And so I would practice. That's all I knew, is practice and practice and more practice. So I'd come back to the gym even in the evenings and flip the lights on, and janitors doing their stuff in the field house, and I'm down there shooting. And it sounds kind of noble and there's some merit to it, but that wasn't where my heart was. And I could hit shot after shot, in practice. I could the drills I was doing, But I was so frustrated that I just had a moment where, up against the bleachers, just after shooting for an hour, working out for an hour, trying to work this out for myself. And I encountered God in a moment. I just was so upset. I was so upset. I said, I've given this game everything. And the next thought I had is, but it isn't loving you back.
Wow.
And I was the only one in the gym. It was almost audible. It was a thought that was so loud that I knew I was experiencing God in a way that I never had before. I wasn't in church. I wasn't in a prayer meeting. It was unequivocally, it was a voice that said, but it's not loving you back. And I knew who it was. You talked about that prison you were in.
Mm-hmm.
That began kind of my departure from. It wasn't that the door swung open, but a wrestling began. A struggling began. I don't know how to do it any differently. It was my confession. I don't know how to do it any differently, God. You're going to have to show me, teach me.
Yeah, a holy unsettledness. I'm not interested in trying to make it work this way anymore.
Yeah,
right?
And yet, as familiar as I was with the other way, I was far more afraid of what God was going to do.
Sure.
That he was going to take it all away.
Mm-hmm.
Again, because I had beliefs that
You had major investment.
he's upset.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot going on in that moment, but it began me in a direction. It started me moving in a very different direction with God that, over the next 30 years, I mean, I made and continue to make progress. There was a lot of other interventions, but that was a very significant one of the first ones when God became different than I had him pegged.
Yeah.
And how I grew up.
I think that could be an indicator of an area where God would like to open up some clogged arteries for you. When you start to feel that little twinge, that holy discontent, that this thing isn't loving me back.
Whatever it is.
Whatever it is,
Right.
basketball or work or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not, something's not right. I mean, that's a great indicator of where you might want to start looking around, poking around, doing some journaling.
Yeah. And the weightiness of our hearts, a game can't handle that. Another person can't handle that. The neediness, the weightiness of my heart, the longing of my heart to be loved. I mean, the game gave me some recognition and validation, but it would, like cotton candy, it would just kind of dissolve until the next time. And that's where, this can be how you look, your grades.
Right.
It can be music. I mean, a performance life is right there waiting to substitute for the real thing. And the conditions that come that we can put on the heart of God can really get in the way of receiving the love of God.
Yeah, as you're describing that, you're talking about addiction is really what you're talking about. Like, I got to go get the next fix. I got to get more cheers from the crowd. I got to hit that 3-pointer. I got to,
What was our old 80s tune? Was it Robert Plant, the
Addicted to Love?
Yeah, you might as well face it. You're addicted to love.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's,
It never satisfies, though. I mean,
not long term.
No, speaking from the position of someone who has tried to use various substances to fill a gap.
Yeah. Well, go back
and
to 1 Corinthians.
self-medicated.
Go back to Corinthians 13. Love is patient. Love is kind. It's not self-seeking. I mean, God is those things. You shared that in the...
Absolutely.
And so...
He is.
And then I think about Tom, taste and see that the Lord is good. There's an experience and an encounter. What are some other ways, Tom, as we just really wrap up this part, what are some other ways that you've connected with the heart of God or seen some things removed that were in the way of your connecting with the heart of God? And something beautifully can happen at the same time. Like what was in the way all of a sudden is not in the way anymore in a moment. And now the flow of God's love can come in. I mean, these are, most of them haven't happened during a devotional or I've had them happen in my truck. I've had them happen in the woods. I've had them happen, in the shower. I've had all kinds of encounters and moments with God where he has kind of broken in more, less and less, I should say, he has to break in now. More and more, he just interrupts, sometimes provokes. But how has that happened for you a little bit?
Well, the way I would describe it, there were some large rocks in the way of my heart that needed a real intervention of love from God, which I got during those times of soaking. And then how it's going lately, it's really shifted into this arena that God sort of shined a light on it for me in my life was when Jesus was talking in Matthew 13:15, and he was really in a frustrated place because he was bringing healing and restoration and deliverance everywhere,
Right,
to anyone who would ask. But his frustration was that lots of people weren't asking because they didn't even know what their problems were. And so he said, if you had the eyes to see, ears to hear, and heart to understand, you'd come and I'd heal you. So a lot of, I think, what God starts to do for us that's just so glorious is he starts to show us, helps us to see where we need this help, because a lot of it is hidden from us. It's very, very subconscious. So, for example, this big rock I had in the way with my dad, well, one of the ways that started to get lifted out of the way was I was on an airplane going to have on a golf trip with him, and they just seemed to always get into a train wreck somewhere along the way. And I was praying about it and asking him why, and I really wasn't asking him, what's my role in this? I was really asking, why is he doing that?
Your dad.
Why is he doing that all the
You're
time to me?
I'm
asking God, why is my dad the way he is toward me?
And these wrecks come, train wrecks come.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I just kind of was, and so
God, why don't you fix my dad?
Yes, you're getting the context of the question. And he just simply said, well, because you've judged him ruthlessly and relentlessly. And that was like a very huge way that God saved me from a place in my heart that I didn't even know existed. And that began a journey of pushing into that with my friends and you guys, and we started going after some of those things. And I find that he's giving me those kind of clues more and more, and it doesn't crush me, it doesn't weight me down. It actually fills me with excitement to know that God, just like we read in Psalm 139, he knows all the story. He knows what happened. He knows where the places are, where we're stuck. He knows the lies we're believing, and is absolutely willing to show us anything we'll let him, you know. And I think what we're discovering is that the biggest problem quite often is we won't let go of something. We won't turn to him yet. We're not ready yet. And so
right.
He's helped me. And so I'm starting to use the term, and I heard this somewhere where the question was posed, well, how has Jesus saved you lately? In what ways has he saved you from your way in a situation that would have been a train wreck? And I could give you stories of lately even where I was getting ready to step into a very potential disastrous situation if I went into it with my heart set the way it was, and he gave me a cleaning out and an opening and a cleansing before going into that situation with a family member, such that I could love and validate and be a father in a way that I wasn't prepared to before. Because of that's kind of the cool part of it. If we walk with Jesus, we get saved from so many mistakes.
I know the story you told me, and I think what you're advocating is that you asked.
I did.
You recognized something wasn't right. You recognized something wasn't of the kingdom, wasn't of the fruit of the Spirit. Something, however you recognized it, you knew that this
isn't of the kingdom. This isn't Christ-like.
Yeah,
I'm in trouble. Yeah,
and you called that timeout we talk about, and said, "Jesus, help me."
Yeah.
What is this? And I mean, listeners, if you just did that 3 times a day, 5 times a day, once a day, can you imagine? But what I love about the story is the ability to recognize, to be awake to there's stuff going on all the time, and we're not sleepwalking to it. Our false self is not running the controls. And that is a very big beginning to living and walking, exploring the kingdom life with the help of the Holy Spirit, guide, counselor, teacher, and to say, what is this? And it starts I think a lot of our listeners need to know, often it starts after the moment. Like, what was that?
Mm-hmm.
Why did that go so badly? But then you started to recognize there's a shift, and it's preemptive.
Very much.
It's pre-game. It's pre the moments. You know what you're carrying in, and that's how the training has happened for us over the years. The first few years of your comeback is just that recognizing how many of these moments matter, how many things are going on, how the false self, your false self, operates. And on a plane, going to a golf weekend with your dad, and you get a package from God that says,
helps me own my part, you know, and see it.
I mean, that wasn't quite the question that you're talking about with your family member recently. That's a different question. You know, the second sort of story is a really honest, good question about, what is this, God? What's going on here? And you're a friend of God, so you've practiced this.
Yeah.
But on the plane, it's why does he always do that? That's not even asking for help, but you asked something.
That's looking for a place for blame. Right?
But you know, it's a question mark, and I think the Father says, "Okay, I can work with this."
Questions are great.
It's a bad question, but let's not talk about that. Let me show you. And he answers, "Oh my gosh."
Yeah.
I think we learn to have these eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart that's engaged initially by watching game film. Right,
like those moments, they went wrong.
Because really, and that's kind of what you did. You're thinking about the times in the past. Hey, this has not gone well, and then innocently you say, you know, what's so wrong with my dad that these things have not gone well, right? Mm-hmm. And God so tenderly says, "Wait a minute, Tom."
That's the old logs
and the bear.
That's
buddy.
the old logs and specks thing, right?
Oh yeah, 100%.
You know, helping somebody with a speck in their eye when you have the log in yours, and this unforgiving, all that. We're going to have to talk about some of that in session 2.
I do want to say one thing. Just real quick.
We'll wrap up in a second.
This process, if like anything else, you start to trust it. You start to get to where, you know, that lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge Him. And you know, when we really trust that works, that will help, that God will give you a word or an insight or help you get clarity. This, you know, starts to happen more often, and it becomes a lifestyle that we are so for advocating. You know, this idea of walking with God, it's so beautiful and so encouraging when you get saved from, you know, stepping in a big pile of something.
Rescues you again and again. It's not once, it's over and over. And your true man evolves. Your true man grows. The true man is starting to then ride with Jesus rather than the false self that has just caught us so off guard and in the mess. And you had one thing, SJ.
Well, I mean, in that process, you learn to trust God, right? Yep. You trust in His character.
I did.
And when you can trust Him, you can love Him, right?
Yeah.
I think about
be thankful, thankful.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'll just land the plane with this, Michael. Something that Graham Cook said that I think is absolutely pertinent to what we're talking about. God allows circumstances in His wisdom that He could easily overcome with His power and sovereignty so that we can be blessed. So, I mean, these things that have happened to us, these things, these vows, these agreements, these things that we've signed for, God allows these things to happen so that we can go through this process of learning to love Him and to trust Him more and more. This had to happen this way for you. The basketball story, right? I mean,
that's where my heart was.
Right, exactly. The thing with you, I mean, the stories that we've shared, we all have these stories of things that have been in the way, that we've overcome, that we've moved through. God has removed from us.
Yeah.
You know, He's opened up that vessel in our hearts, and we continue to do that.
Yeah. What if your strategy isn't good?
How's that working for you?
Then who more than God wants you to be free from a bad strategy of life and arranging for love? And this is part of God's heart for us. And so we'll call that one part 1, okay? And then we'll step into part 2. So thank you for taking the time to explore with us on the Exploring More podcast. SJ, Tom, and myself, we're grateful. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us via email on exploringmore@ at Zoweh.org, exploring more at Zoweh.org. Also, if you want to write a review or share your thoughts on the different platforms, that iTunes and Google Play, anywhere that you find the podcast, if you want to do that, we sure would appreciate it.
Yeah, rate, review, and share. That'd be great.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in part 2 of The Heart of God. We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is Zoweh.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoweh on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoweh on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.